Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our October webinar. For those who don't know me yet, I'm Megan Lebeda, and I'm a program manager here at Kirkwood Corporate Training. I'm so excited to have Amy Hospodarski here with us today. Amy and I are former coworkers in another life and another industry, and I am so excited to get to work with her in another capacity here at Kirkwood. And now she's diving headfirst into her leadership and coaching development. Amy is passionate about change management, planning facilitation, and workforce development. Today, Amy will be presenting on leadership skills for new and seasoned leaders. As Amy and I discussed yesterday, leadership of today is so different from the leadership of yesterday, and constant development of our skills is just critical to what we do every day. And so with that, I will turn it over to you, Amy.
Thanks so much, Megan. Welcome, everyone, and thanks so much for having me. As Megan said, my name's Amy Hospodarski, and I'm a self-employed consultant, and I'm based out of Iowa City. To give you just a brief introduction to who I am, I always like to show the best parts of me. This is my family. As I said, I live right now in Iowa City with my son, Brooks, who's that good-looking guy on the far right, my beagle, Maya, and my partner, Kyle. I always make sure to say probably the most important member of our family is that beagle. She's definitely the boss, and we love her the most. So if you're a dog person, double shout out to you. In my career, I have done a lot of different things. I've had a very non-linear path. I've done everything from marketing, PR to operations, and I've been a CEO. And one thing that I've had common throughout all that time is getting to explore people. So as a marketer, I got to explore people on the external people, on the outside customers. And then when I moved into operations and to senior leadership, I really got to apply that type of thinking to management and leadership. And I've become really passionate about digging into what our job is as managers and how we can do it well. So that's what we're going to do today. A few housekeeping items. This presentation obviously is virtual. And sometimes that can feel a little bit awkward to jump in or say anything and you're not really sure how to interact. If you do have a question throughout the session today, feel free to put those in the chat function here on Zoom. Megan has been so nice to offer to kind of monitor to that throughout the session. And she will either bring questions to my attention if we need to answer them right away, or she'll keep them to the side and we'll have questions at the end. We'll have time to answer some questions. She's also volunteered to be my timekeeper. I went back through this morning and I've been pretty ambitious with the amount of stuff we're going to try to cover today. I talk fast, so hopefully that will help, but we're going to move quickly. Megan is going to give me a 10-minute warning, so I will be sure that we are out of here right on time, but I am going to move rather quickly. Maybe another last warning is that I do tend to be a little bit nonlinear. So if any moment you think she's talking very fast and I'm not really sure where she's at, please say something. It's possible that I skipped a step or a slide, and you will not at all hurt my feelings if you bring us back to what I missed. So with that, we are going to jump right in. So the reality is that most of us become a manager along the path of our career a little bit by accident. The most common path to management is that we become really good at our jobs. Before we have a team underneath us or people to help us accomplish things, we're kind of becoming experts in task management and time management. We're showing that we are able to not only understand and be an expert in our field, but that we can also get stuff done. When we do that well, often the reward for that is a promotion. We get the promotion. Yay, that's good news, right? And it does. I think it gives us an opportunity to kind of dig into those expertise, that knowledge, that experience, and even take that a little bit further as far as the tasks go. But we do kind of take on another side of work, and that is leading people. And the honest truth of it is that there's not a lot of help figuring out how to connect and lead people. I think our companies are often really good at training managers on how to do what I call the logistics of management. how to make sure that you're setting expectations, how to handle an employee that maybe is having a hard time meeting expectations. How do you do hiring? How do you do firing if you have to do that? We often have technical training on the how or the what we need to do. But we don't get the additional piece of training of how do we shift from being a task doer to leading a group of people to accomplishing a task. Today's session, we're going to really dig into that mix of art and science that is leadership of people. We have the science side, which is knowing systems and policies and best practices. And we have the art side, which is more handling personalities, handling emotions and team dynamics. Leadership's a really nuanced skill, and it often is untrained or unspoken. And my goal today is to kind of bring up and talk about some of the unspoken or untrained sides of management. So when I talk about task management, I'm talking about getting things done. And that is definitely a part of management. You're making sure that you and your team are hitting deadlines, getting projects done. You're making sure that the day-to-day function of your departments and of your teams are going well and that people are getting what they need. And that is a big function of your job as a manager. The other side of this is what I call people development. So it focuses on creating a safe environment, an environment where people feel supported and they can think creatively. They can have access to the resources they need, and they know that you have your back, that you have their back if they need it. And a lot of that takes time, it takes trust building, and it takes a little bit more of the leadership art than it does the science of management. When I talk about the goal of a manager in the more leadership side of management, I often talk about it in this framework. This isn't mine. It's something I've borrowed and used. It was developed by a group of psychiatrists and psychologists. And it's the idea that these 8 C's, the 8 C's of leadership, of self-leadership, are the characteristics that when we as people are able to function the highest, be the most creative, be the most not only productive, but plugged in, engaged, connected. When they do research, they often find that these are the characteristics that we're accessing. So as managers, it's our job to create an environment where our staff can access these attributes in themselves, and they can see us modeling it as well. So as we look at these characteristics on the screen, we can look at the idea that calm and clarity, those things help us stay focused and grounded. These things help us be able to stay the path when maybe things are in crisis or when we're feeling overwhelmed. In the inverse of this, if we're not accessing calm and clear, we're often feeling nervous and confused. And that's not a great place to function out of. It makes us feel a little bit more closed off. It makes us grab onto resources and power. If we're able to switch from that nervousness into calm and clarity, we're able to access a whole new area of our brain. Same with curiosity and compassion. These help us engage with our team's concerns, and it keeps us from, instead of rushing to judgment, or finding solutions, it lets us just be open and curious and try to better understand what's happening before jumping to those solutions and judgment. Confidence and courage, they empower us to make decisions, even in uncertainty, maybe most importantly, in uncertainty. We have teams that are going to be looking to us for guidance, but at the end of the day, we want them to feel like they have the ability to make a decision if they need to. We want to be able to empower them to do their jobs without our permission. That is the ability to access confidence and courage rather than insecurity and fear. The last two are creativity and connectedness. These enable us to access innovation, They let us foster strong relationships within the team, and they allow us to find solutions to problems that maybe we wouldn't have been able to find before. So, just out of curiosity and to give you a minute to reflect, I'm going to take a minute and ask you to think about a time where you were working on a project, either personally or at work, where you really felt like you were sitting in the middle of these 8 C's, where you really felt like you could access that curiosity and courage and creativity. Once you can find that time in your memory, I'm going to ask, there's a few questions here on the screen. I'm going to give us about 30 seconds, 45 seconds to just jot down some answers. These are not things you have to share. I'm not going to push us into groups or do anything like that. This is only self-reflection. So think about a time where you were really clicked in to those 8 centers, and how did you feel? Just for the sake of this, I'm going to go back to the C so you can see. Okay. So if you had that memory in your head and you've now thought about, when I was in that moment, how did I feel? What was in my body? What was in my mind? What made me feel the most lit up in those moments? We now know how that feels. We know what we're going for, but how do we do that? Right? That's the big question. This is where emotional intelligence comes in. You'll also see this shortened to EQ, EI. It gets shortened. It's kind of supposed to be designed to be the opposite side of IQ. So emotional intelligence is our ability to recognize and manage our own emotions, feelings, and also interact with others. It helps us, this part of our brain and our functioning helps us not only know what we're feeling, but communicate it and also interact with others who are maybe in a different space than us. This type of skill is something that can be developed, and it's crucial that we develop it as managers. To be an effective leader, we have to be able to motivate our teams, and we have to navigate conflict, and we have to have thoughtful conversations and make hard decisions. And at the heart of that, of course, you have data and you have the science of it, but you also have a lot of this EQ living there. So it's essential that we dig into that as much as we do the data. So what is emotional intelligence? Plainly put, I would say that we've talked about the extended definition in this previous slide. This grid is what I most use when I try to illustrate what emotional intelligence is. Within personal development, we have at the top what I see, and what I do. In those quadrants, we have self-awareness and self-management. Self-awareness is understanding yourself. Simply put, I call it not only understanding who you are, what you like, what you don't like, what you're good at, what you're not so great at, having some awareness to maybe where you need some help and where you can excel. But it's also taking that a step further and trying to understand what it's like for others to interact with you. Understanding how your tone or your way of interacting may come off to other people. So it's knowing yourself and then also trying to gain some empathy and understanding in how other people view you. We move over to what we do. I call this self-management. It could also be referred to as self-regulation. So that's the ability to filter through our thoughts, our feelings, and kind of take them in as information instead of reacting to every single thought and feeling that we have. This is being able to move from reaction to response. Okay, so we're trying to, now that we have awareness to who we are and what it's like to interact with us, we're now going to move into how do we interact with that and manage it. When we move down to our teams, it's very similar. Emotional intelligence allows us to get the social awareness we need, both individually and as a team dynamic of our group. It helps us gain an understanding of who people are, what their fears are, what their strengths are, what their opportunities are. And then it also allows us to move into the management of that relationship, which is understanding how we can support them, either by encouraging them and showing them what we see in their positives, or by offering assistance and support in the places that they maybe need help. So why does all this matter? The biggest link that we can draw in the workplace with EI in our teams is that it's the main connector between, it's a main indicator in building trust in our teams. Trust is the foundation of not only being able to effectively get things done, but also having a team that feels supported, plugged in, and like they can do innovative processes, which is at the end of the day what we want. We want people to be able to move past their day-to-day management of their tasks into being taking on initiative, being creative, and accessing things that we maybe are not able to see. The reality is that management is modeling. I always like to joke that this is the good and the bad news of management. I think often when we become managers, we get really caught up in our head on what the right way to do it is. We want to know what the best way is to address issues. We want to understand what the rules are, what is the how-to for how I do this, and how do I tap into all the things that I have access to in order to do it well. And sometimes that can overwhelm us in trying to make the best management decisions. And I want to be very clear that being thoughtful and trying to make the best management decisions is really important. Understanding your role as a manager and understanding the techniques that you can use to be a better manager are extremely important. And you can find a lot of best practices out there for this. But at the end of the day, what creates a team that is functioning well is trust, and trust is made from modeling. People will follow what you do, not what you say, right? And I know that we know this as a concept, but the reality is this happens at work all the time. We as managers need to be able to embody the characteristics that we want our team to reflect back to us. And that might be the hardest part of learning to become a manager. So as we talk about modeling as a way of managing, we're going to go back to this idea that there's kind of two sides of management, which is a little bit oversimplistic, but for today's purposes does the job, right? So on the one side, we have managing tasks. And as we talked about in the beginning, oftentimes you've landed in management because you got really good at managing tasks, okay? You got good at your job. You were able to show and prove that you have something to offer. Even if you're coming in from another place, you were able to show that you have gained experience and knowledge that lends itself to this type of next step. So with task management and modeling behavior, one, you want to make sure that as a leader, you are taking your own advice. What does that mean? It means that you prioritize your work, your deadlines, your goal setting, exactly how you would want your staff to act, right? So if they see you acting and like creating goals, setting deadlines, meeting deadlines, communicating when expectations are not going to be met, becomes much easier for them to have a model. I always refer to it as like creating a menu, right? So if you have employees that are not quite sure what to do or how to handle something, they're going to look to you and other leaders in your organization to kind of understand what menu options exist for interacting with this exact moment. So if they can go back to their memory of interactions with you and pull an example, that's the most effective way to create teams that are gelled together, is by modeling. Good news is you should have a lot of these already. It seems maybe oversimplistic for us to share our knowledge on things like time management and things like communication or small tips that we learned along the way, but that is very much our job. The things that we just do now without thinking, we can now communicate some of those tips and tricks to our team, which is really helpful and can be a game changer to give people information that they may not know. The other side of modeling is going back to this idea of modeling emotional intelligence, right? So we kind of modeled the tasks and how we want our time and our tasks to be handled. But there's whole other side of how people act, how people interact, and we need to be modeling that as well. At the end of the day, the manager or the leader sets the emotional climate for the team and for the relationship between person to person. The way that you handle difficult moments, the way that you handle great moments will be recognized and stored away. And I don't mean to say that in a scary way. I mean to say it in a little bit of a freeing way. If you're able to yourself, be yourself and access some of the things that we're going to talk about today, things on the screen, then we are going to be able to, we'll be just fine. This is how you connect with people, is just by practicing being yourself. Okay. So the first part of what I call practicing being yourself is being willing to be open. So there's this idea in corporate culture of transparency and openness. And of course, it's what we need. There's always a line, I think, in especially senior management, but any level of management, that you will always have more information than the people on your team. You sit in more meetings than they do with people maybe they don't have meetings with. You work with departments that they maybe don't have access to, or on a regular basis, they don't work with on a regular basis. Beyond the walls of your organization, you may even have points of view or access to people outside that they may not. This is all stuff that gets stored in your brain. And I always say that I suffer from, I forgot that I knew that itis, right? So teams really want to know what you know. And I think not out of malicious, but sometimes we accidentally withhold information that would be super helpful to our team. The idea of being open and transparent is not that you're just going to tell everybody everything all the time. That's not all that super helpful. You need to be aware of your role as a manager and with them, and also your role to the company. So obviously there is a line here, but the more information you can share, the better. The way that I position this is to say, sometimes we have information we think is not that big of a deal, because the reality is maybe it's not. But if other people don't know that it's not a big deal, they'll maybe think it's a big deal. I work a lot in change, okay? I do a lot of work for change at the senior level. And the one thing that people, hiring committees tend to forget is that at the end of the day, their staff want to know, like, is my job going to be okay? Am I going to get paid? Like the nuts and bolts of their existence in this big change. And part of that is because while kind of going through this transition, those leaders are thinking, well, of course it is. We don't have to communicate it because it's not at risk. But here's the thing. Those people are worried and they want to hear you say that it's okay, right? This is an example of when sharing information is actually really helpful. And it's a big one. This happens in small ways every day. Our brains are wired to figure things out. In the absence of information, our brains will fill in the gaps with whatever we think makes sense. Sometimes that is exactly what is happening and we're right. And sometimes we're so far off because we only see half the dots. Manager's job is to give as many of the dots as we possibly can. So there's not holes in our line and everyone knows which direction to grow, matter of speaking. Okay. Vulnerability. This is a scary one. Sorry, y'all. This is the idea. So often when I talk about modeling as a way of managing, our brains might here. I'll just blame myself. When I first heard that as a concept in management, my brain immediately went to like, but I can't be perfect. Okay. So if you hear modeling as management, and in order to get your team to act as you want them to, then you have to be perfect. Here's where vulnerability comes in. Because we're not looking for our team to be perfect. Therefore, we don't need to be perfect. We need to be modeling what it should look like when we are imperfect, because the reality is we're going to be. So part of that is being willing to share our own imperfections with our team. Where there is a power dynamic in a relationship, it's the person with more powers responsibility to handle the dynamic of that group or that relationship. And so if we're willing to offer vulnerability first and show our shortcomings, the ways that maybe we get frustrated, the ways that we maybe have things that aren't according to plan, that gives permission for our staff to do that back to us. And in that scenario, we often are in a place where we can help. So modeling in a place of vulnerability can be really helpful. If that seems like I don't even know where to start, here are a few things that I always suggest. Ask for advice. As a manager, I'll use myself as an example. I was a marketing manager. I am not a graphic designer at all. I don't have any training in it. I like to fiddle around. I'm a creative person, but I always needed a designer to be on my team. That was not my expertise, right? So as often as I possibly could, I pull in the designer as an expert in that field, and I ask for their advice, and I take it. Okay. So ask for advice. Make sure you're asking for advice in places you'd be willing to take it, and treat them as the experts they are. This will build trust. People like to feel like you feel confident in them, and you should. This is your team. If you have someone you're like, I couldn't do that for, that might be something to address and how to pull them along so that you can elevate them in a new way. Give credit as much as possible. Okay. If one of your team members has an idea, takes part of the process, is able to take your jumbled ideas and give you a perfect PowerPoint in the end, tell everybody how great they are at that. Give all the credit in the entire world. Okay? Make sure people know how good your team is at what they do. This is for other people. It's also for your team. Okay? Flip side of this is take blame. If your team makes a mistake, take the blame, even if it was not your mistake, especially if it was not your mistake. Give credit, take blame. It's okay. You're going to survive. You're the leader. You can handle it. You've got broad shoulders. And your ability to take that on for your team is going to provide them a massive amount of trust in you. Okay? The reality is, as the leader of a team or of a department, the work of that department is technically all yours. So if a mistake gets made by one of your team members, you should be the one to claim it. Now, that doesn't mean you just let your team member off the hook. You can provide accountability and coaching, follow back up, and see if there's ways you can make sure that mistake doesn't happen in the future, right? But your ability to shield your team will be a massive game changer in your ability to get them to trust you. And my last tip in vulnerability is say you're sorry. This one, it seems silly to say. And when I do this presentation in person, frankly, I almost always get a giggle because it seems really oversimplistic. But sometimes when we are in the position of power, saying that you're sorry goes a long way. Okay. Being able to recognize that you made a mistake takes some of the pressure out, or take some of the pressure off your employees. And it also shows that they're allowed to say they're sorry back if something happened. Okay? So get in the habit of saying you're sorry when you need to. Don't over apologize, but make sure that when you do make a mistake or make someone's jobs harder, that you are able to apologize. The last example for today that I'll talk about in modeling emotional intelligence is clarity. You'll see over to the right on the slide, there's a quote from Brene Brown that's pretty potent to me. I think I spent a lot of years trying to capture this, and I read it in one of her books, and it kind of struck me like a lightning bolt. The idea that clear is kind, unclear is unkind. I'm a Midwesterner my whole life. I think we are particularly good at kind, which is one of the things I like about us, but we're not particularly good at clear, okay? And I think we will try to elevate kindness, or what we perceive as kindness, and let go a little bit loosely of the need to be clear. And I think the reality, especially in a work environment, is that the more clarity you can provide, the more directness you can provide while also being kind, is a gift. Every day I strongly believe that people show up and want to do a good job at their jobs. They want to be successful. They want to feel like that they are succeeding, and the best way to allow people to do that is to make sure they have clarity of their role when they're doing a good job, and clarity when they're maybe missing the mark a little bit. A couple ways I think sometimes this can be intimidating. I'm not saying that you just like take a deep breath and like puff your chest up and like tough, I call it tough guy 'em. That's not what I'm saying. I think sometimes when we when we skirt around a topic, or we choose to approach a conversation in an indirect way, unconsciously we're saying that either we're not quite emotionally comfortable and mature to handle the conversation, or we think that they're not quite emotionally mature and comfortable enough to handle the conversation. Instead, approaching it by saying, I'm telling you this because I think you can handle it, is a little bit of a different framing for your team or your employee. If you're sharing with them information or feedback because you do think they can handle it and they want to know what you have to say, of course they do, right? You're going to try to mix the idea of vulnerability with openness, and that is where you get clarity. We're not talking about cruelty. We're talking about the idea to be clear. And you could even ask, this is one of my tics. It's become something I'm actually trying to roll back, but I'll say, does that make sense? Am I being clear? The other thing you can ask is, depending on the conversation, this is a question I'll ask often, is there more information you wish you had about this? Because again, going back to openness, there's sometimes information I have that I just don't think is important. And if they say, oh yeah, I do actually wonder this thing, I can say, oh yeah, it's this. Or I can say, that's a great question. Let me get back to you. Okay. So confirming clarity is a way to ensure that you're getting what you need out of it. Sorry, guys. Okay. So we have all these tenets, and we've been practicing showing up. We've been practicing being vulnerable. We've been practicing bringing our team together, getting to know ourselves, getting to know each other, understanding and noticing our team dynamics, and it's going really well. The reality is that how you respond in the face of a setback, or in the face of bad news, a mistake, something that could be perceived as failure, those moments are the catalyze, or they would catalyze whatever you have been building up until then. Again, we're not looking for perfection here. So we're going to talk about how is the ideal way to deal with these moments when something doesn't go quite right. How do we try to hold on to ourselves, respond instead of react? And then we're going to talk about what happens when we aren't able to do that. Okay, so step First of all, we're I want to do a little bit of an activity with you. Okay. I'm going to tell you a story about a prior life that I had. I worked for about a decade in community relations for a financial institution here in Johnson County. What does that mean? It means anything that wasn't a deposit or a loan product that the community wanted from us, it likely came through me. So donations, sponsorships, volunteerism, annual banquet tables, all of that stuff. And I loved it. Okay. Most of the work I did was big picture, strategic, leading. But there were a handful of things that I did that were very detail oriented. One of those was that I was the one that orchestrated the tables of 10 at the XYZ banquet. Something you should know about me is part of my nonlinear behavior is that I can be a bit all over the place. Being detail oriented is not something that was ever on my report card. Okay. And so through my career, I've developed a system for if I have something I need to do that comes in an email, I take it out, I put it on a list, and then I delete the email. If it doesn't get to my list, it doesn't exist. Okay. That's the like basis of this story. So fast forward, I work at a bank and I'm not a banker, as you could probably tell. I'm a little bit more emotive. I work for a bank whose CEO is very banker. Okay, that's how I would describe him, like the most banker of the bankers. Okay, he's 6'7". He's like serious all the time. He wears a suit. He calls jeans blue jeans. Okay, he's a little bit of an older school guy. And one day he sends me an email and says, "Hey, I committed to this table of 10. Will you fill it?" And I say, "Yeah, no problem." Fast forward to the day of, I get a call from my boss and he says, "Amy, do you know you did not fill that table?" I could have thrown up, frankly. Sorry, you guys. I rushed back to the bank. I walked straight into his office and I said, "I'm so sorry. This is what happened. You sent it to me. It didn't make it to my list. It's not an excuse. It's a reason. It was totally my fault. I take accountability. But you're right. I forgot and I'm so sorry." And he looked me straight in the face and he said, "Amy, sometimes you don't get second chances." Okay. Now, fast forward, I didn't get fired, you guys. I still had a job. I actually was successful in that job for years to come, and he and I did recover. Okay, so don't be too scared. But in that moment, when I was feeling like the worst possible employee, because I had forgotten this thing that was so important to him, I was met, frankly, with shame. I was met with kind of on, it made me feel bad. It didn't put me in a place where I thought I could come up with another solution, didn't give me any amount of grace. Okay. Again, we recovered, it was okay, but in that moment, it was horrific. Using my example, I'm going to ask you to do another thought activity. I want you to think about a time where you were in a similar place as me, where you were having to kind of reach deep down and go to a boss or maybe a boss's boss and say, I messed up. I made this mistake. I don't know what to do. I'm so sorry." And it was met with it didn't go as well as you hoped. Once you get that memory in your head, just take stock. How did that situation feel? How did you feel? And what actions did it spur? Part two of this is how did that incident or interaction impact um, your vision of that relationship moving forward? I'll give you about 30 to 40 seconds. Just jot some things down. Again, you won't have to share. You can keep writing if you are. If you have a little, I'm going to offer another question for consideration. If you go back to that scenario, the same exact scenario, except for this time, imagine that the person had approached the conversation with curiosity instead of judgment, trying to understand what happened. Try to imagine if that conversation was more gentle, had more empathy. How would it have been different? Okay. You can keep writing if you'd like. But I'm going to continue just for the sake of time because I know we're getting close and I want to leave time for questions. Um, Moral of this story is that when we're able to show compassion and vulnerability in moments that are hard, um, it shows that perfection is not the goal. We're not after perfection. We're after growth. We're after improvement. And the only way to do that is to be able to be curious and have someone that will support you when you fail. The reality is, if you're trying new things, if you're doing new things, you're not going to be perfect at it every time. You're going to miss things. Having an environment where that is okay is will allow you to be a much more functional team. Okay, so let's just side note really quick. Let's say as a manager, we are not perfect and we have a moment where we freak out. Okay, we get given the information, and let's say in this scenario, I say, Amy, sometimes there are no second chances. You know, I have this really dramatic response, and then I go home at night and I think, why did I say that? Like I really didn't need to say that. Like I let my emotions get the better of me. What do? You come in and you say, hey, Amy, can I talk to you? And you pull them aside and you say, hey, I think I let my emotions get the best of me yesterday. I'm really sorry. Simple as that. Okay. Likely that'll lead to a whole conversation. But the worst thing you can possibly do in that situation is just to push it under the rug and keep moving forward. The ability to acknowledge that maybe you have made a mistake, even in management, again, will create a trust that becomes pretty hard to duplicate or break. Okay. So what's next? I want you to be able to leave with a few what I call recommendations of what to do as a manager to kind of start practicing some of the things that we've talked about. A couple of these are things that maybe you already are doing, or maybe things that you know you could or should do, and hopefully it'll just be a reminder or an option to do. The other, I have a couple that maybe are new. So we'll walk through them together, and then I will pass it over to Megan to take any questions and to close us out. So how do we cultivate this type of environment with our team? I say, don't be afraid of having meetings with a purpose. Okay, let me be very, very clear here. We are not going after meetings for the sake of meetings. We are not going after email or meetings that could have been an email. Okay, what I'm talking about here are regular, consistent check-ins, either individually or as a team, that have a specific goal, purpose, and agenda. So listed here, I have a few options of things we could do. I always recommend that if you have direct reports, that you're meeting with them one-on-one at least every other week. This is a time to just half of the time check in on task management. How is this project going? Do you need my support? Is anybody giving you a hard, task management? And the other half is development support. Okay. This is yours to keep track of, the time split. You don't want these to turn into all task lists. What do you have going this week meetings? You want to make sure that as a manager, you're also bringing in some development. Okay, so asking questions, questions that are not just, what do you have going on? Questions like, are there any projects that you feel really stuck on? Are there any relationships that are causing you a lot of stress? What is the thing keeping you up at night right now? This is the contextual information that we get as managers that allow us to be really helpful. Ask questions, but make sure that they're questions that allow them to give you information you do not already have. These one-on-one meetings also leave space for hard conversations. So if they need to tell you something hard or vice versa, you have a time on the calendar. Team meetings, do team meetings, have educational meetings, either do departmental updates, bring other areas of your business in to give updates, make sure you're having purely educational meetings. Bring in external training and development staff. I'd be remiss to not at least give a shout out to Megan and her team at Kirkwood. If you are looking for someone to provide you a training of any kind, literally any kind, and you're not really sure where to start, Kirkwood's continuing ed is a great, or training programs are a great place to start. So contact Megan or any of her teammates. She has a ton of trainers that can help you do that. And then the last two I'm going to mention very, very quickly, and then we'll do questions, is do curiosity sessions. I was telling Megan about these yesterday. These are something I started on my marketing team. If we have a problem, a project, instead of doing brainstorming a solution, do curiosity sessions and only allow people to ask questions. We need to make $10,000 by the end of the year. What questions do we have? Okay. You take these questions and find a solution, but starting with curiosity allows us to blow the gates wide open, and maybe learn a little bit how we're seeing things. And lastly, sorry, talking so quickly, is practice vulnerability. Do it this week, next week, in a team meeting, in a one-on-one meeting. Share a story about something that's been hard for you. Share a story about how you dropped the ball on something, and resist the urge to like tie the bow on it. Sometimes there's a bow and there's like this lesson, and sometimes there's not. Share your humanity is my ask of practice being vulnerable. I'm coming up on time. I know people have to run. Megan, I know that you're here. Thank you so much to you all for coming. Thank you, Kirkwood's Corporate Training, for having me. I've had a whole lot of fun. So I'll take questions if they're already.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. Before everybody goes, I did just launch a poll. If you could answer just a couple questions really quickly about how you enjoyed today's webinar, it really helps us to prepare for more webinars in the future. My last question in that poll does ask, what do you want to see from these webinars as far as professional development goes? These are free and they're 15 minutes, so you get your money's worth because they're free. So let us know what you'd like to see. Amy, there was a question about, will they have access to your slides later?
Yeah, I'm happy to provide those, Megan. I don't know. I can send them to you and you can include
Perfect.
them maybe with the recording.
Yes, yeah, that sounds great. If I will be sending out the recording to everybody who registered today, so all of you will be receiving that once we get it subtitled. So I'll include Amy's PowerPoint with that. Any other questions before I let you all get back to your day? Lots of nice compliments in the notes there for your slides, Amy. Okay, I see no more questions. If you do have questions, everybody, and you think of them later, feel free to reach out to us on social media. We're on LinkedIn and Facebook at Kirkwood Corporate Training. Other than that, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.